Hi, welcome back to the American Center Online. My name is Jehan, and I am a frequent guest. Happy to talk to you about whatever topics you want to talk about. A couple weeks ago, I did a talk about books to read during quarantine, and someone asked if we could actually do in-depth talks about American writers, and maybe one writer per talk. So I'm talking today about Toni Morrison, and later on this month, other people will talk about their favorite artists and authors. So Toni Morrison is a great American author. I do not have a PhD in literary fiction or African American experience or American contemporary works or anything. So there are people out there who are trained to talk about Toni Morrison, who have written books about her works, who have classes. And I have none of that, but I really love her works. So I feel like I can talk about it from that perspective. She was born in 1931 and she died just in 2019, unfortunately. And her novels span from 1970 with The Bluest Eye all the way to God Help the Child in 2015. And so we will discuss all of her books, and I will try to talk in depth as much as possible, a little bit about her bio. But I would implore you to read them yourself and to also find other sources of information about Toni Morrison. Next slide, please. So one source of information is they actually made a documentary about Toni Morrison. It came out just last year, and it's called The Pieces I Am, and it's really beautiful. It's 2 hours long. It's PG-13 because she does go into some of her novels, or maybe almost every single novel, has something, graphic, some violence, some rape, something might happen. So this is, a documentary you want to watch with adults in the room. And let's go ahead and play that so we can see it.
My grandfather bragged all the time that he had read the Bible, and it was illegal in his life to read. Ultimately, I knew that words have power.
I wanted as many people who could hear my voice to understand the importance of her work. Get people to trust that, oh, this is something safe, and then, bam, hit them with Toni Morrison.
One of them early reviews says she's got a great talent. One day she won't limit it to only writing about Black people. Like, really, it's limiting for her to write about Black people?
My grandfather bragged all the time that he had read the Bible, and it was illegal in his life to read. Ultimately, I knew that words have power.
I wanted as many people who could hear my voice to understand the importance of her work. Get people to trust that, oh, this is something safe, and then, bam, hit them with Toni Morrison.
One of them early reviews says she's got a great talent. One day she won't limit it to only writing about Black people. Like, really, it's limiting for her to write about Black people?
People began to buy Toni Morrison, and then we began to teach her, and as a consequence, they had to pay attention.
I know you'd sick unto death of being labeled a Black writer.
I prefer it.
Oh, I thought you probably were tired of it.
Well, I'm tired of people asking the question.
Oh yes, of course.
I don't know where this woman's energy came from to raise two kids, to bring other people of color to the party, and also write these novels.
Toni was an editor at Random House.
Navigating a white male world was not threatening. It wasn't even interesting. I was more interesting than they were. And I wasn't afraid to show it.
Suddenly, the canon wasn't the private property of white male writers.
I've thrown this book across the room and then walked down the steps laughing. Like, you read Toni and you cry, but you gotta laugh.
Texas Bureau of Corrections banned Paradise because it might incite a riot. And I thought, how powerful is that?
When Toni Morrison published Beloved, it was an extraordinary turning point. We can never think about slavery in the same way.
A friend of mine called me up early in the morning and said, Toni, you won the Nobel Prize. And I remember holding the phone thinking, she must be drunk.
Toni Morrison's work shows us through pain all the myriad ways we can come to love. That is what she does, with some words on a page.
Okay, so that's just a teaser. If you can see the actual documentary, You would be very impressed. It's 2 hours long. And this was released in June 2019, less than 2 months before Miss Morrison actually died. Next slide, please. All right, so here are a couple of pictures of Toni Morrison. She was born, her first name was actually Chloe Ardelia Wofford, and she changed her last name to Morrison from her husband. She was married for a period, and then she was divorced. They have 2 children, and she took Toni from her saint name, which is Anthony, and she said that people had a hard time pronouncing Chloe, so she changed her name. And I'm not really sure, but I think she might have still gone by Chloe with her family and inner circle. So Miss Morrison was an author, as I mentioned, and also an editor. She was an editor at Random House. She was a professor for many years. She went to Howard University for undergraduate. Then she got a graduate degree, and then she became a professor. And eventually, she became a professor at Princeton. She was born in Lorain, Ohio. Her family had moved to Ohio before she was born from Alabama. And if you have been able to listen to any of our presentations on civil rights movement or slavery in America, you'll know that actually Ohio was in the northern areas, and it was not segregated the way Alabama was. So she had a very, very interesting and a very rich multicultural childhood. She talks about having a Russian neighbor, and that her mom learned how to make a cabbage dish, she talks about, from her Russian neighbors. And she had Italian neighbors, and she went to school with different people from different places, and she went to an integrated high school, which would not have happened in Alabama. She definitely would have been in a segregated school in Alabama. People often talk about how Miss Morrison wasn't published until she was 40, over 40. And over 40 is not old. But there was a time in my life that I might have thought over 40 was old. But I think that even though she wasn't published yet, she was probably doing all this writing in her head. She was collecting things. A lot of her books that she wrote were based on things she saw, ideas she had, articles she read. So she was collecting these experiences over her life. So while her first book didn't come out until she was in her 40s, she was writing throughout her entire whole life. And she talks about how she was teaching, she was an editor, and she was writing all at the same time. And someone said, "How can you do this?" And she said, "Well, it's all books. It's all my life is writing. It's books, writing about books, talking about books, editing books." So that's an interesting angle to take. She had a theme in her life. So Toni Morrison's books are not the kind of book you can read while you're watching TV. I know I mentioned in my quarantine segment that I was reading like 2 books at once, and I wanted to read these like kind of really easy to read books that made me feel good and I could quickly read. That is not a Toni Morrison novel. A Toni Morrison novel is a kind of book, if you put it down and you pick it back up again, you don't, and you open it to the wrong spot, you're gonna like, wait, what? What happened? And you have to reread stuff. And so when I watched the documentary, Oprah, the American celebrity, the talk show host, mega social civil rights activist, just all over entrepreneur woman, amazing producer, everything, Oprah. So I say Oprah, you know who I'm talking about. Oprah says that when she read Song of Solomon, or was it Beloved, she had to reread it a couple times. And I was like, oh, I'm not dumb, because I had the same experiences. Like, I have had to read Toni Morrison's books more than once, or I put it down, I pick it back up, and I start over again like a chapter before, just to catch myself up again. And that's just, her work is so rich and it's epic, and the dialogue is very vivid. And it's also just have all these twists and turns. It's not, even a love story really isn't a love story. There's all these things that get added into it. And so she won the Pulitzer Prize. She also won the American Book Award in 1988, and she won the Nobel Prize in Literature in 1993. She faced a lot of criticism in her life as a writer, especially in the beginning. A lot of people said things like, I think the clip shows this. People made comments like, "You're not a bad writer, but why don't you start writing about other issues other than Black people? Why don't you cover other topics in American life other than African Americans? Why don't you just broaden yourself?" And she was like, "No, I don't want to." Then people also complained that she didn't write enough about the Black-white experience, that she didn't focus on like racism and slavery from the vantage point of what white Americans have done. She focused on just the Black Americans' life and what they were doing in their everyday life and their struggles but not necessarily their struggles against white people. And that was something that maybe other authors were doing at that time. And people felt that because she wasn't doing that, she hadn't really reached some heights, that she had to be a certain kind of Black writer. If you're going to write about Black people, you have to write about slavery and racism and what bad white people have done. And that's not what she focused on. She didn't make anyone good or bad. She just focused on something else, some other topics and her own feelings on these topics. In 2012, she won the Presidential Medal of Honor from then President Barack Obama, which I'm sure, like in Russia, you have a highest honor that can come from your president. That's one of our highest honors you can achieve as a civilian in America, is to get the Presidential Medal of Honor from your president. Next slide, please. So this is a list of her 11 novels. She has done some works where she wrote with other people, or they were a compilation of some sort. But these are her 11 novels written only by Toni Morrison. They are recognized as the Toni Morrison novels. They start with The Bluest Eye in 1970, as I mentioned, and go all the way to 2015. So I am, unfortunately, you can say that I have only read the books with the asterisks. I thought I had read most of her books. And then as I put this presentation together, I learned that she did a lot of books that I didn't even know about. I knew about Paradise and Jazz, and it was on my to-do list, but I had no idea Love, A Mercy, Home, all these books that were written in the 2000s, I had no idea. I hate to say this, but I had no idea they existed. I don't know how. I guess I was just doing something else. So she has all these books that I have not read yet. So they are all on my list to read now. But the books that have an asterisk are the ones I have read, and maybe even read more than once. Next slide. So her first novel is The Bluest Eye. Came out in 1970. And this book is set in like this town. Her hometown as a girl, Lorain, Ohio. And it tells this story of 11-year-old girl, Piccola Breedlove, who prays that eyes turn blue. So this book looks at how children, Black children growing up in America, and I'm sure this happens in other countries where there's a dominant or primary race or group or religion and a marginalized community at some point. They wanted to look more white. Like a lot of children wanted to look more white. A lot of African American children only had white dolls. And that happened for a very long time. It is now, of course, you can get dolls of every skin tone, every eye color, every hair texture. It's an amazing time to be a child of any ethnic background now. You see children of all shades with dolls of all shades. And that is awesome. But in this time, in the time of Toni Morrison's childhood and the time of this book, you didn't have that. So this girl in the book talks about how she keeps praying that her eyes turn blue. And Toni Morrison actually says she got this idea from a friend of hers when she was a kid, who said she didn't believe in God because she had prayed for 2 years straight that her eyes would turn blue when they had never turned blue. And lots of things happen in the book. And it shows how this child's life is devastating, and there are things that happen that I cannot get into, but it's an unforgettable, powerful novel. I think Oprah, it was on one of her book clubs, and Oprah had mentioned that this is a book that every American should read. All right, next slide, please. Excuse me. That's my child. All right, so thank you. Love you.
Are you recording?
Can you please go back outside and play? All right, yes, okay. Sula, next book that came out. This is a book about these two Black women, and they also live in Ohio, and their experiences together and how things happen to them where their lives change drastically. And one of them, raises a family, and then one of them goes somewhere else. And it's just basically a portrait of two women. And, so far, these two books, her first two books are about the Black female experience, which people weren't really writing. No one was really writing about the Black female experience. They were writing about men and not so much Black women. And so this was another, step into the unknown for people who she gave a voice to a voiceless people. Next slide. All right, Song of Solomon. This is one of my favorite books. I saw someone put a comment in the chat that this is one of their favorite books as well. this book changed my life. I just felt like when I read it, I learned so much. I gained so much understanding of things I didn't know I didn't understand. Um, and it came out in 1877. There's so many different uh, covers. I can't say that Toni Morrison's covers are the greatest. I don't think it matters. I guess I know my kids pick books by the cover sometimes, so you might not pick a Toni Morrison book by the cover, but trust me, they're all amazing, and you should read them. So it's the characters in this book. You have Milkman, that's one of his nickname, and basically he and his friend go through. They are friends and then they become enemies, and they come on opposite sides of society, and there's confrontations, and there's this vision of being able to fly, and it's definitely a book that you have to read more than once, or just read with care. You can't read these books and do other things like I don't know, read the book while you're also washing dishes or something, or I don't know. What can you do at the same time? I have read books while I am doing other things. I have read a book and writing a book. I've read 2 books at once, but this is a book you have to put yourself into. And she, by this point, she also started getting more acclaim from this book. And this was her first book that she wrote where the main characters were men. And it also, she wrote this book right after her father died, I believe. So she started using things she thought her dad would tell her, and she would learn from him, and she wanted to honor him and things in the book. So I don't want to give you any spoilers, but most people agree that this is an amazing book. And if you want to read a Toni Morrison book, I would say Bluest Eye, Song of Solomon are the 2 you should read first, and then read everything else. Next slide. Okay, so Tar Baby came out in 1981. This was my most recent Toni Morrison book that I read. It's kind of like a love story, but like I said, there are no like Toni Morrison books where you just have one theme and you're done. Like, okay, he's gonna love her, she's gonna love him, they're gonna live happy ever after. It's not like that. There's a lot of stuff happening. There's a fashion model. First of all, it kind of starts off with this like mangroves, marshy area, and like the environment has like a voice. So you start to understand the landscape and the community, the voice of that, and then the characters come into the play. So there's a fugitive whose name is Son, which at first was confusing to me because his name is just Son, like Son, the son of somebody, because his dad called him Son, and his name has always been Son. I think he has a real name, but that's his nickname. And then there's a model, Jehan, who lives with a white family, and she works for the wife. And then there's like a cook and they're in like a Caribbean area, and basically there's like all of these, the fugitive kind of is around. I don't want to say how he interacts with the family, but there's an interaction with the fugitive and the family. And then there are things that happen between the fugitive and Jehan. And so there are, it is a lovish story, but there's a lot more that happens than just boy meets girl, girl likes boy, boy and girl get together. Like there's a lot that happens. And it does not, it has a very complicated ending, which I think is like a keystone of like Toni Morrison books. They don't just end where you're like, oh yeah, I knew that was going to happen. No. Next slide. Okay. Then we have Beloved. Beloved, I forgot to mention that I really didn't get into Toni Morrison until I was 19, 20. So I was in college, and I had someone introduce me to her works. And I don't think I could have read them in middle school. Some people do. I don't think I could have read them as a child. I tried to read The Color Purple when I was quite young, and I just remember being like, whoa. I just kept putting the book down. I would open it up somewhere else because I thought I had seen the movie, but there are things in the book, and I was like, whoa. So I wasn't ready or mature enough to handle it. So I definitely was mature in college. But Toni Morrison's books, a lot of her books have been banned. And I don't actually know how often this happens in Russia, but in America, I think actually happens here too, has happened. People sometimes ban books, and a lot of times books get banned so that they aren't used and they aren't available to children in their libraries. And children, I'm not saying 4-year-olds, I'm saying like 17-year-olds, 18-year-olds, like kids in high school can't get some of her works because they have been banned by the school board, which is the group of people who sometimes make the rules for the school, or the community or whomever. And they have banned them because there's a lot that goes on in her books, and there could be rape, there could be incest, there could be all of that, murder, there, I don't know, language maybe. And so these books were banned. And so I personally don't think my kids could handle Toni Morrison now, but I think they probably could handle her in high school because they've had a much more like rich experience growing up than I did, maybe necessarily. So we'll see. So Beloved was banned, I think pretty much was banned as well. Beloved is this story about, so in the 1970s, Toni Morrison found this article in a paper about a woman who had escaped slavery. This is an article about the past. You know, slavery didn't exist when Toni Morrison in the 70s in America, but she read an article in the past about a woman who escaped slavery. She took her 2 children with her to Ohio, and she was tracked down by the slave owners. And instead of returning to slavery, she kills one of her kids like on the spot. And then she, when they get on the boat to go back to wherever it is she's a slave, wherever that was from Ohio, she has to take a riverboat, and she jumps into the river. And the other child, the toddler, dies, and the mom is dragged out the water. So after this happens, there's a debate about whether she should be tried for murder or she should be tried for destruction of property. If she is tried for murder, then they have to say the slave who murdered her slave children, that slaves were actually people and they matter. So then there was the thought that she should be charged with destruction of property because she's destroyed someone else's property. Whoa, that's so loaded. So anyways, she read this article and she got an idea in her head, okay? Then apparently one day she was sitting on her porch or sitting in her like study, and she looked out the window and she saw a woman come out of the lake fully dressed with a hat on. And so she put these 2 thoughts together and she wrote the book Beloved. And I have a clip of the Beloved. Beloved became a movie. It became a movie in I'm not really sure. It was like the 90s. It was not too long after the book came out, maybe the early 90s. Beloved came out as a movie. And apparently, you know, Oprah read the book and was like, I have to make this into a movie. And Oprah ends up starring in it, and Danny Glover. And I saw the movie before I read the book, and I was like, whoa, like most people were. I mean, the movie and the book are both, you know, amazing. And so let's go ahead and play the clip, and then I'll talk some more.
Is that you?
What's left?
How long has it been?
18 years. What kind of evil you got in there?
It ain't evil, just sad.
If you have a ghost here, you don't.
Can't be easy. A young girl living in a haunted place.
Got a tree on my back and a hint in my house. Nothing in between but the daughter I'm holding in my arms.
I'm a grown man. Nothing new left to see or do. We can make a life, girl.
What might your name be?
Beloved.
What you looking for when you come here, beloved?
I look for this place I can be.
I think the baby got plans.
A baby? No, it's grown. It's the age it would have been had it lived. She a charmed child from the beginning.
It's clear why she hold on to you. I just can't see why you holding on to her.
You won't ever leave us, will you?
Don't tell me what to do. But I'm on your side. She's the one. She's the one I need.
Here in this place, we are flesh. Flesh that weeps, laughs, dances barefoot in the grass. No running from nothing, because I'd rather know my children will live at peace in heaven than live in a hell here on earth. So help me, Jesus.
Me and my woman's plan on starting a new life. Nobody's gonna own us no more. Nobody's gonna own my children either.
No matter what happened, God has led you home.
All right. So, yes, Beloved, the movie and the book are both pretty serious. So, if you didn't catch what was happening, it's not a spoiler alert to say that it's not a spoiler to say that this slave escapes. Oprah plays. She escapes from the South. She moves to Ohio. She's there for like 18 years, but she's not really free because um, after she escapes slavery, she's found by the slave masters, or as in the book, there's someone called the school teacher, and they're coming after her and her children. And at the beginning of the book, at the beginning of the movie, she tells her kids as the slave masters are approaching, run to the shack, run to the shed, and they run inside. And so, this is a part of slavery that I don't think I really understood until I read the book. Like the emotional damage it did to people, because I think as a kid, you think, okay, they had to work really hard. They had to pick cotton, or they had to clean the kitchen, they had to make biscuits, they had to do things. But they lost their identities and they lost their ability to control the destiny of their lives, which is so much harder to deal with than just picking cotton, which picking cotton is hard, but I've only tried it once, or making biscuits. Like in my head as a kid, I thought, oh yeah, they had to work for people and they didn't get paid. That's a slave. No, a slave is losing your identity and being forced to breed, not to have children, but breed because they take your children away from you. It is just, it's something we can't even understand. And so, yes, I will do Richard Wright next time. I'm sorry, someone just asked to do something about Richard Wright. So she runs away from slavery. She's got her kids, and instead of sending her kids back to slavery and having them grow up as slaves, she makes this decision that as a child, or when the first time I read this as a young adult, I don't think I understood until I read the whole book. She kills her kids. She one of them. Well, she attempts to kill like 4 children, like a boy and maybe 2 girls, maybe 3 children. The 3 to 4 children she has. I can't remember. I read this a long time ago. But she kills her kids. But then a child comes back to life as a ghost or as an incarnated child 18 years later. So this child, one of her kids she killed, comes back. She's been living with the ghost of her. And so after she kills the kids, the slave master is like, you're crazy. I wanted the kids because these slave kids were going to last them for the next, 40, 60 years. They were going to use them on the farm or in the schoolhouse. They were going to have them do things and cook for them and stuff. And now they no longer had these products. So they just left, the person Oprah plays in the movie, left Faith, the person in the book. They left her there with the dead children. But a child comes back. And the child that comes back is named Beloved because when she is put into her grave, because she didn't have a name yet, the character had wrote Beloved on her grave. And yeah, it's like a ghost story, like a haunted ghost story. It's a love story. It's a dramatic story. It's a lot of stuff going on in this book. So Beloved, another one of Toni Morrison's amazing contributions to American and worldwide literature. Next slide, please. Okay, so the next book is Jazz. It came out in 1992. This is in one of the books I have not read yet, but I do know the general synopsis of the book. There is a door-to-door salesman who's been selling beauty products, and he shoots his teenage lover. He's married, but he has a lover. And at the funeral, this man's funeral, the wife comes in. At the funeral for the girl he shot, the wife comes and attacks the corpse. There's a lot of stuff going on in this book, like all her books. Another amazing book that she wrote that shows like the hopes and the fears and the realities of Black urban life. And one thing I read about Toni Morrison is that her books span 40 decades. So she talks about slavery, and then she goes all the way up to contemporary times in America. So she covers like every facet of the African American experience living in America. Next slide. Paradise, published in 1997. So I believe this book, again, this is one I didn't read yet either. I hate to say that, but it's true. This is about this town of only like Black people, like a town which is like paradise. But there's a lot of things that happen in this town as they think they can kind of live amongst themselves and everything will be fine. And then there's a rape, of course, there's a murderous rape, but there's terror. There's all of these things that happen. And basically, again, she weaves in these complex themes of race, of religion, of gender, and of things in our past that we can't escape. So what we might consider to be a paradise becomes something entirely different. Next slide, please. Love came out in 2003. I didn't read this yet, but I will read it. So I looked online to try to get us a summary of it without knowing what happens. I hate looking at summaries of books because I just want to know it's a good book. But just to tell you what I learned, basically, there's just this man who has lots of women in his life. He's got his wife, his daughter, he's got a granddaughter, he has employees who are females who work for him, and a mistress. And all of these different women, their take on this man. And it's supposed to be very erotic and funny and heart-wrenching. So it is on my to-do list. Next slide. 2008. This was a book or that's in the Americas. She also has this part of this book is about a Dutch trader and into the set in the slave trade, and then and then a plantation life in Maryland. Again, this is supposed to be kind of, it was a story of mother and daughter, and what a mother does to save her daughter in the situation of slavery. And I haven't read it, but I will. Next slide. Home, written in 2012. This book is about an African American veteran who comes back from the Korean War to America, and he has spent time in the war fighting, in a war for America. He comes back to find there's still racism in the U.S. and he is crippled. He comes back with a disability, and so he is Black with a disability, and it just basically talks about him revisiting his childhood and him trying to possess a sense of self and trying to figure out where he stands in the world as he's come back to a country that he feels defeated, but this is his home as well. And I think a lot of veterans who have returned sometimes have had those feelings. Definitely, 30, 40, 50 years ago in America, I think we've come a long way with racism in the U.S. And we've come a long way, definitely, that people, when they come home, they do feel like they're actually coming to a home. But this book was set many years ago. And so I will strive to read all these books within the next year or two. And then we come to her last book. Next slide, please. God Help the Child, 2015. And I believe people called this her first novel set now. Like, it wasn't a historical piece. It didn't go all the way back to before slavery or during slavery. It didn't go back to post-slavery. This is currently right now, and what is happening in our lifetime. Again, she tells these tales about how, our childhood sufferings and our childhood experiences shape the way we are as an adult, or misshape the way we are as an adult. And I think this would be a phenomenal read to read as well. I have not read it, but I will. Next slide. Okay, so that concludes my summary of Toni Morrison. And I just made a slide of 3 other women. I mean, there's not just 4 African American women in America who've wrote amazing literature, but these are just 4. These are 3 more who come to mind as I'm closing that you might want to think about. There's Alice Walker, who's on the left. She's the picture. She was blinded as a child in one of her eyes, and she wrote The Color Purple, and that won the Pulitzer Prize, and it became a movie. And she's an activist. Toni Morrison also was an activist in her own way. There were definitely people who were, I think she says something like, she never picketed. She didn't walk up and down the street, but she knew that was not forever. You could not picket every day, all day, but she could make sure there were books that lasted forever. So as an editor, she made sure that she edited books and encouraged people to write books that would help tell the civil rights movement, help tell the need to have equality in America. And for example, I just forgot the name, Angela Davis. She worked with Angela Davis to write her autobiography. Okay, so moving to the right, on the top, you have Maya Angelou. And she is unfortunately deceased since 2014. She was a poet. She was also a singer, an actress, and a director. She wrote many things, including I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings. She performed at President Clinton's inauguration. And so, if you are looking for poetry and you're looking for poetry that helps you see into the African American experience in America, you should definitely start with Maya Angelou. And then bottom right, I have Lorraine Hansberry. Um, Tremendous talent. She died at the age of 34. I mean, I think about that. Like, if I had died at 34, like, what would I have accomplished so far in my life? She died at 34 and she accomplished so much. Amazing. She wrote the play A Raisin in the Sun, and among other things. And so A Raisin in the Sun takes Langston Hughes's quote, "What happens to a dream deferred? Does it kind of dry like a raisin in the sun?" And The Raisin in the Sun is about a family, an African American family who is trying to sorry, all the background noise. I like to hear my child, but my other kid. So anyway, she wrote a play about like this African American experience, and you can understand what they go through as they're trying to make their dreams happen. And there's a daughter who wants to become a doctor. There's a son who wants to kind of be successful and make money fast. There's a mom who wants to buy her own first home. And there's all these dreams, and there's a little bit of money, and something happens with that money. And you see what happens to a dream when it's deferred. Does it dry in the sun like a grape and turn to a raisin? And then I guess a raisin is a thing too. So maybe it's not a bad thing. You'll see what happens. That is the end of my presentation about Toni Morrison. I will be happy to answer your questions. I am not a Toni Morrison expert. As you can see, I haven't even read all her books, but I do love her. And could you please repeat the poetry book? So, I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings. I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings is a really famous poem by Maya Angelou. And I think she also wrote Ain't I a Woman? I'm almost positive. If she didn't, whoever wrote it was amazing as well. Ain't I a Woman? Both of those are the kind of poems that would help you understand like the African female American experience in America. And not only that, African, it's everyone. Like all of us struggle with identity issues. Could I tell about her Nobel Prize award? So, okay, I can't tell a whole lot, but I can tell what I know. I know that before she got the Nobel Prize, Toni Morrison, there were a lot of people who felt like she should have gotten awards in America and different awards. And like I said, people love Toni Morrison now, just like other artists. People love them when they're dead, or not even when she died, but like they love them after 10, 15 years after her works came out. But when they first came out, a lot of people criticized her for only writing about Black people, only writing what she wrote. And some people, when she won the Nobel Prize, felt she didn't deserve it. It had been, I mean, only a few women had won it at that time. And I maybe she was the first Black woman, I think. But definitely, she was one of a few, like a handful of women who had won the literary prize at that time. I think she won it for a compilation of all her books up to that point. Or maybe she won it for Song of Solomon or Beloved. But I'm trying to figure out if I can find the year. But when she won it, it was a shock to her. And apparently people called her to tell her it had been announced. And it was announced before anyone had actually called her. Like, no one had cell phones back then. No one had Twitter. So she won it in 1993. So we can look back and see what book she had in 1993. So 1993, she had done, almost everything that, all the things that I read. Bluest Eye, Sula, Song of Solomon, Tar Baby, Beloved, and Jazz. And she won it in 1993. And it was a big shock to her. And it was amazing. And it was, wonderful that she was actually picked for this. And she invited some of her friends to go with her to get the award. And I think that some people said she deserved it, and some people said she didn't, and that there were so many other authors writing about, important topics, and she was just writing about women and who had decided to kill their kids instead of going back to slavery. I mean, that's a very shortened way of talking about her books. I mean, obviously her books were moving and amazing and dramatic, but for some people didn't see it that way. So there was a lot of backlash when she won it. As all people who win awards, you got people who think they should have won it and people who think there were other people who deserved winning it. Someone asked what was the greatest lesson I had learned from Toni Morrison books. Well, I mean, I just think that like I was mentioning, as a kid, I know slavery existed. And, I grew up in the Virginia. It's kind of the South. It's the South. Definitely where I'm from. There were farms and stuff. And I knew slavery was pick cotton, make clean houses, take care of people's children. But like the Bluest Eye really okay, I'll answer that question. Okay, okay, so I get a question and I'm thinking about my answer to that question now. So anyway, I learned from her, the biggest thing I learned is that slavery was so much more than just picking cotton, doing physical labor. Like, what would possess a person to kill their own child, to prevent them from growing up in the horrors of slavery and the evils of slavery? That is some really evil stuff. Like, if you're going to kill your kids because you don't want them to do it, I can't even think of a thing out there right now that I would want to kill my children before they go into. I mean, I would say probably the Holocaust was something where people made the decision if they knew what was about to happen, they would probably, But there has been no other thing that I could think of that people can say I killed my kids. There's a book that talks about the Rwandan genocide, and a father who had convinced his wife that if they come to take you, I mean, remember the Rwandan genocide was between the Hutus and the Tutsis. If they come and take you, kill yourself and the kids before they take you, so you don't get, hacked to death by a machete. Whoa. But there have been very little things in life that people would probably say, my kids are better off dead than going through this. And so I think actually reading Beloved helped me understand. Reading The Bluest Eye about how deeply. So someone else asked, what's my favorite book? So Song of Solomon was my favorite book, but I think The Bluest Eye also is my favorite book. So let's just say The Bluest Eye is my favorite book. And it is my favorite book because it helped me understand the complexities of like slavery world and deeply ingrained racism is in your brain. And it's not about, like the different fountains, the integration, segregation, or the different school buses, or sitting in the front and the back. It's about what it does to your psyche when you only see a certain kind of person on TV, or a certain kind of person on a book, or you only have a certain kind of doll. What it makes you feel like every day when your beauty is never can be what you think beautiful is. If you think someone else's culture, ethnicity, their shape of their nose, their thinness or thickness of their lips, their eye shape, that is beautiful. You can never be that. So what is it to grow up and feel like you can never be beautiful in your own skin? So Bluest Eye was definitely my favorite book, and it helped me learn what it must have been like to be in that situation. And I'm sure there are people today in situations where they feel like they really wish they looked like some group of people, or they talked like them, or they sounded like them, or they were their height or their whatever. And that is just a horrible, life to live, to know you can never be beautiful. So what is the next book by Morrison I'll definitely read? I think so. I can't believe I didn't read Sula. I kept looking at the Sula description. I was like, I don't remember reading this book, but I thought I read all her old books. I think I will probably read God Help the Child. Maybe I'll start in 2015, read her last book. And then after I read that, I think I'll go to Paradise and read that. And then maybe I'll go back and forth between, and I'll read, I'll go God Help the Child, and then I'll read Sula, which I missed, which is her second novel. And then I'll just go backwards from current to past to current to past until I meet somewhere in the middle at love, I guess. But yeah, I have 7 books to read. I have 7 books to read because I have not read even half of her books. Next question, if there's one. you have other artists you would like us to dig into, other writers, or even, I probably could find people who want to talk about scripts or producers or, screenwriters, please let us know. What are you reading now? So I just finished reading Little Fires Everywhere. I mentioned that in the quarantine scenario. Actually, no, that's not the last book I read. I just finished reading Clap When You Land by Elizabeth Acevedo, and that is like it's kind of young adult because the characters are teenagers, and it's about like see, 9/11 was 2001, right? A year or two after 9/11, a plane crashed in New York that was headed to the Dominican Republic. And I actually lived in the Dominican Republic from 2004 to 2006. And even then, like 4 or 5 years later, people still talked about this plane crash. And of course, people will talk about it because people died. Everyone died on board. And the book is basically talks about two girls who experienced loss from that plane crash. It's not long. It's not as long as a Toni Morrison novel. So I finished it in a couple of days. And it's a really good book. It's a different kind of good book. It's not like this, but it's a good book. It's a great book. So there was a question that came up, and I didn't get to actually read it before it disappeared. It seemed to have like a historical something another. There was a date in it. I didn't see that question. Sorry. Oh yeah, so I don't know. Someone said, could I tell about the heroic some society that Toni Morrison was a part of? The heroic movement of 1981 in which Toni Morrison was the leader. Could I talk about that? So that will show my ignorance to all things Toni Morrison. I mean, I picked Toni Morrison because she's one of my favorite authors. And now I'm looking it up. I mean, I can guess what it's about, but I don't know. So I don't know, but it looks like maybe she gave some speeches in 1981 about this topic. So I'm gonna have to do research to find out more, to find out what it's about and why I don't know about this. Sorry. So someone mentioned someone should cover Richard Wright next. So definitely I can do Richard Wright. And I have read some of his books. So we could do Richard Wright next. And I know like someone else in my office is doing some of the other writers, not necessarily African American writers, but there are other writers that we will talk about. Perhaps next week. Yeah, I'm trying to think of what else Richard Wright wrote. I know he wrote Black Boy, and I read that, but I'm trying to think if he wrote anything else that I might have missed. But I'll look up research on him, and I can do. That is also a very deep book. But we should get better, right, when we read. So I just finished reading the book. What else am I reading right now? I'm reading this Montessori child book, which is it's just a nonfiction book about how to take some of the Montessori thoughts into your child rearing, taking care of your children, how to use Montessori into your everyday life. But if you have a suggestion about a book I should read, please put it in the comments. More questions, I guess I will say thank you so much for joining us at the American Center Online. Okay, wait. So what American writer do I think is great but is not widely known? I mean, I would say there's a lot of American writers that are great, not widely known. I don't know how many of you knew about Toni. I mean, some people have responded they read the books before, but people don't really talk about Toni Morrison as much as they do Mark Twain or even Stephen King. I mean, there are a lot of American artists, and I think that's a great question. I think I will go through and actually start trying to do some research on who everyone knows is the best American author, and then who I think is the best American author, and see where those lists don't match. So I think there's a lot of people who write books that people around the world have read, and some of them have also been because they have good publishing companies. So if your publishing company makes an effort to get your book translated into Russian and makes an effort to put it in Russia, or your book turns into a movie, then more people will have read it and will read it. But if your book is amazing, but people don't read it, and it doesn't get translated, then it doesn't really show up around the world. And in America, you have these different classifications. You have a book that's amazing because literary people like it, because it has done well in the literary community, and because it has won prestigious literary awards. Then you have the books that are great because they are on the New York Times bestseller list, and they stay on the New York Times bestseller list for months at a time. And then you have books that are really good because people like them and they shared them. So those three things don't always go together. If you're lucky, I think you may be, or not lucky, but whatever you want to call it, blessed, lucky, if you are amazing, your books get great literary acclaim. Your books sell a lot and are New York Times bestseller, and then people love your books and talk about their books. But sometimes you only reach one of those categories. And Toni Morrison has been known for saying when she wrote Song of Solomon, she loved it. She didn't think anybody else would like it. So she was actually shocked when people liked it because, she wrote books the way she felt like they should be, not because they would sell, not because everyone, probably told her, if you do a little bit of this and change it a little bit, people will like this more and it won't get banned in schools and you'll make more money. But that's not why she wrote her books. She wrote them because she loved the topics, and because she saw women come out of water, and because she had visions and dreams and saw things that she decided to put into her writing. All right, I'm gonna start my wrap-up comments again, and then maybe I'll get a question. But thank you for joining us today on the American Center Online. If there are other books or authors or things you want to look at, please let us know. Just put a comment or send us an email, and we would love to take that on for the future opportunities. Have a great afternoon. Bye.
Thank you.